The floor is yours, Ms. Donnelly, or Dr. Cascone.
Let's see, do you want to?
Yeah. If you would just skip to,
Slide 4?
well, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just skip to 6, please. So, much of this information was presented at the tentative budget, and I can understand that it can be. By the way, I don't think anyone was attendance. Any members? Maybe there were a few members of the public that were in attendance at the tentative, but last month in March. But anyway, I know subsequently it was shared, and it can be frustrating because it gives the impression that on some level the district is obfuscating the cuts. But I think it's important to understand sort of the order of operations. So the tentative budget is exactly as the name implies. It's tentative. It's not definitive. There are still things in play. When a staff member is impacted by a reduction in force, the statutory deadline by which they need to be informed is May 15th. There is a contractual obligation here per the bargaining agreement with the Education Association that sets the deadline at April 30th. We informed any staff who might be impacted on March 30th. So we informed them not only in advance of the contractual obligation, but also in advance of the statutory, statutory deadline. And really, so we were balancing in presenting that information, being discreet in deference to the staff members who were impacted, which is why we really spoke in really more generalities like you see on this slide here. I will go over this slide again, and in the next slide, I have had a few members of the community reach out and inquire, what were the other cuts? Kind of like wanting to see it in the context of the discussion around dance, which was a very fair question. And I want to thank Board Member Manning, who really just said, I think it's important for us to share that more widely with the community, and I agreed. I think that was an absolutely astute suggestion. So you can see exactly where the cuts came from, the reduced positions came from, and then also ultimately like how many people were really impacted, because we were able to actually retain many of our staff members by way of attrition to fill retirements and things of that nature. So when the dust settled on it, there were 15 full-time certificated positions reduced in the budget. 11 of those were instructional, meaning classroom teachers. There was one instructional coach, which was the last instructional coach remaining in the district. It was an elementary literacy coach. One school counselor, one clinician, and one administrative position, meaning an administrator. We were able to retain 9 of those 15 employees by attrition, sort of what we say backfilling them into a position that was vacated as a result of a retirement. There were 6.5 uncertificated, what we call educational support professionals. There were 3 paraprofessionals, 2.5 administrative assistants, 1 custodian, and 3 of those 6.5 were able to be saved or retained by way of attrition. We had 2 part-time certificated staff. These were 0.5 physical education and art at Village School. And really, the reason why we reduced those was not because we don't care about the arts, because we do, but because when we reduced the classroom teachers at Village, and I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds on the schedule and how it relates to the collective bargaining agreement, but by reducing those 4 teachers, we needed fewer related subject teachers to cover those classroom teachers during one of their 2 prep and professional periods that occur during the day. Because essentially and I am going to digress a little because it is really relevant. If you've been following along in terms of the negotiations, it's been quite a saga. But when that second professional period was built into the schedule, previously, before that, the classroom teacher taught that period. And they taught either science or social studies during that period. So when they were now provided that second professional period, we needed to bring more faculty members into the school to now teach science or social studies. But that alone does not cover the second professional period for all the faculty members in the school. How do we cover the other ones? Through related arts, physical education, art, music, etc. We ended up reducing 4 instructional positions, 4 classroom teacher positions at Village, and by reducing those 4 classroom teacher positions, we no longer needed those 2 half-time teachers who were employed exclusively to be able to fill in for that overflow of those second professional periods that weren't being covered by either science or social studies teachers. And then we are reducing 7 hourly employees, which are lunch aides, and we're able to do that by virtue of the language that the board negotiated with the Teachers Association, which now enables the administration to have certificated staff perform 4 25-minute duty periods, 4 25-minute lunch duty periods, which represented a savings for the district, not only in hourly employees, but also blue sheet vouchers that teachers previously were submitting to cover lunch. And in fact, the savings associated with that language were what enabled the board to negotiate what was essentially a budget neutral contract, which has all been discussed and shared previously, but I think it's relevant to share in the context of the budget as well as in the staff reductions. So if you'll just advance to the next slide, it takes a little bit of a deeper dive into, I'm sorry, that one there.
Hold on, before you continue onto this piece, just to close the loop, last week while you were not here, there was confusion, or it was brought up that on our data that was provided by the administration, the dance enrollment was 27, so there was some confusion on there. Can you just speak to why there was a discrepancy? Because we talked about this, but I think for the sake of transparency and clarity, when we went back and asked how come the data was different from what we got versus what the public was thinking the enrollment was, and then you did have an answer, but you weren't here to say it last week. So Can we just clarify that?
Sure. So I think first off is and I want to say that I really did apologize to Dr. Harritz, for sort of throwing him into the fire last week. And really kind of, it was never meant to be a presentation, nor was he prepared to give a presentation. Furthermore, the decision was not Dr. Harritz's, right? So at the end of the day, the documents that he shared were really internal documents. One could argue that they were really not even necessarily presented or formatted in such a way that was really appropriate for public consumption, but that's neither here nor there. I think that where it came in is yes, there are 2 buckets of data. There's the enrollment at the high school, which is, I think next year actually, if my memory serves me, is actually somewhere around 37. Then that's spread out over 3 levels of dance, 1, 2, and 3. They are semester courses, and then there's also an adaptive dance course. Those cohorts, semester to semester, can overlap, right? So in other words, you might take dance 1. So in other words, you have 10 students in dance 1, and you have 12 students in dance 2. They may be different. They may be some of those may be the same students who are moving up through the levels. But that aside, on the middle school level, dance is one of 10 electives that we offer to 7th grade students, and 12 electives that we offer to 8th grade students, which is, by the way, is really on the 8th grade level is 3 times really what is typical in a middle school schedule. But I think for me, and I think, and if I may be transparent in terms of what was, in making very difficult decisions, they're all bad decisions now. There's no this is a good decision. It's just what's bad and worse. That's really where we're residing right now. Was when you look at the total number of students that are taking dance in middle school, which really, when you think about that, those are quarterly courses. So one could argue that the 80 some odd students that are taking that course in 8th grade really by ratio kind of equals out to the 25 or 30 students that are taking it to the high school or taking it more for a full year. But for me, it was the significant decline in enrollment when students move into the high school. How I interpreted that is that they were, maybe perhaps more exploratory and maybe whimsical about taking dance in middle school, but as they moved into the high school and now were trying to balance their academic priorities of, whatever their projected post-secondary path was. And I do think that a lot of students are presented that they would love to continue to take dance, but when it comes down to taking dance or a course that they think prepares them or positions them better for post-secondary admission, they tend to, because that's kind of what, we're an academic rigorous school. Our students have high expectations and aspirations for what they go after here. So that was sort of the thought process. Now, I do know that, some of what was discussed was that, we're sort of, we're hiding dance under a bushel basket. Like we're not being forthright or advocacy on the academic or course counseling process is not robust enough, sort of, encouraging kids to dance. Like, I mean, I can tell you that it's explicitly stated within the program of studies, right? So, that detailed program of studies, which goes home to the students in advance and to parents, is, outlines the courses, right? So, and, the nature of the conversations that counselors have with kids is like, they start with talking to the kids, like, what are your goals, right? Like, what are you interested in, right? And that sort of drives the counseling process. It's not a counselor saying proactively, like, unless the counselor felt like this could be good for a student, right? For some reason. They think, even though have you considered dance? Because based upon their knowledge of the student, they might say, yeah, this could be a nice thing for you. But more times than not, the counselors are responsive to feedback that they're getting from the students and questions they're asking. So, I would agree to disagree that we're being, sort of coy, if you will, in our selling of the dance program. Anyway, I know that's a long-winded answer, but to me, it was the relevance of the significant decline. Now, if we were looking at 85 students taking dance in middle school, and all 85 of those were continuing to take it in high school and continuing to take that throughout their high school career, that tells a very different story than the data tells now. But for next year, it's really, at this juncture, it's a moot point. But I appreciate the question, and I wish I had been here last week to more to assist Dr. Harretz. Sounds like he needed it. I don't, and that's not throwing shade at Dr. Harretz. That's just, we're a team, and I feel like I could have supported him.
All right. You're not done with the budget yet, are you?
No.
Okay.
Well, yeah, continuing along. I
had a couple of questions.
Miss
yeah.
Lamb, took me off track, because this is an important slide, so we're going to walk through it. So really, just walking through the cuts and the reductions. Anyone that are highlighted in green, means that there was not a person, if you will, who lost a job, right? Because, as much as we can, we try and retain our good people and our loyal and capable employees. So we did, up until this year, we've had a director and an assistant director of buildings grounds. We did cut an administrative position, and I want to highlight that because that is another myth that has been, again, no one's actually emailed me directly or sought audience with me to actually have a conversation about it, but I do understand that it's been, again, sort of ping-ponging around social media, that we're administratively heavy. It's categorically false. Not only is the falsehood illustrated by the data, which was presented last year and then again shared in my newsletter, where the data demonstrates that we have lower than average administrative salaries, we have lower than average administrative costs, and we have higher ratios of administrator to students in the county. So all the data, that's 3 data points triangulated that tell a very different picture. But additionally, every year since I've been here, I've reduced members of my own leadership team. Every year. There's not been a year that has not gone by that I have not reduced an administrator, and this year no different. But I will tell you, and those decisions are not made lightly like any others, but I will tell you, we're lean, right? And we've prioritized, particularly, for example, we used to have one supervisor that oversaw science, engineering, technology, and math. So I did invest in that by having a dedicated math supervisor. If we want to combine, if we want to move this district forward from a curricular standpoint, if we want buildings that are safe, that are well managed, well, we need administrators to do that. Notwithstanding, we did reduce one of our administrative team again. We were able to reduce a custodial position that was by retirement. We were able to reduce a high school position that was for a teacher that left the district for an administrative position that we did not fill. We reduced one Spanish teacher position at Indian Hill School, moving to a digital program. Now, as a former world language teacher and world language supervisor, obviously, I strongly endorse world language programs, but as a world language supervisor, I did that for probably 6 years. I came to realize that that elementary language programs are a conceit. They just are. We don't have the time in the schedule. We don't have the resources. And so let's call them what they are. They're exposure programs. We're obligated by law to have world language programs K-12, but we neither have the schedule time nor the resources to be able to offer it in such a way where it becomes an acquisition model. So let's marshal our resources in 7 through 12 on the secondary level. At the age of 7th grade, which is when I started taking Spanish, and I don't want to get too nerdy on you, but the lateralization of the brain has not yet occurred, so students can still learn language naturally at that age. I'm living proof of that. I didn't take it before 7th grade, and I speak Spanish. So, and that teacher was able to move up to the high school and bolster our numbers, our staff at the high school, thus keeping our world language numbers in Spanish lower at the high school. We reduced a middle school ESL teacher. We have a Latin teacher who is also ESL certified, and we were able to continue to deliver our Latin program as well as our middle school and high school ESL program. Unfortunately, that was a reduction in force. We reduced an administrative assistant at Village School, an administrative assistant at Indian Hill School, and one of the high school secretaries was reduced to a half-time secretary, but both of those administrative assistants that were reduced, one of them was a retirement, and one of them has been offered a position elsewhere in the district. We were able to reduce a middle school French teacher by way of numbers, and you can see that we reduced a kindergarten section, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade section, all of which we were able to retain outstanding staff members by moving them into positions that had been vacated via retirement. Our elementary literacy coach has moved into a elementary literacy intervention position where she will still be able to deliver some coaching, but also address the literacy needs of our neediest learners. We were able to, we cut a math position, but then we did have a retirement in math, and so we were able to retain that teacher. I already spoke about the part-time village, part-time art and PE. These next two hurt. I'm not going to lie. And I had a conversation with somebody today, and they said, "Really? You're cutting counseling? You're cutting mental health supports in this day and age?" And really, we're cutting one over. When I came here, we added an elementary counselor. That is the position that we're cutting. We are not cutting middle school or high school counselors. And one of the rationale, if I may share, why I felt ultimately reasonably comfortable with it is that we do have our remaining clinician in the district. Both of our clinicians originally came to us from Rutgers. We brought them on as our own employees. The remaining clinician is really embedded within the elementary level and is extremely hands-on and involved in providing really intense mental health supports to our elementary students and working in concert with the school counselors on the elementary level, which was ultimately what gave me a level of confidence that we could continue to support our younger learners that may be experiencing some mental health challenges. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here with the slideshow. Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, look at
I
that.
don't know if you're looking at your slide, but the bottom.
I'm not looking at my slide.
Yeah, the bottom is cut off, so make sure you cover it.
Measure that.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Okay, apologies for that. Okay, I apologize for that. Matt's my loyal technology team member, Matt Schuckert's. Thank you, Matt. You're the best. Okay, so sliding back over to the left column, there was an elementary social studies and science split position, 2nd grade and 3rd grade. The 3rd grade, as you saw, we were able to retain. 4th and 5th, 6th, we were able to retain. The elementary social studies and science was able to be reduced for the same reason that the half-time PE and village teachers were able to be reduced, because when you reduce 4 elementary sections, you no longer need that additional social studies and science teacher to plug that, really to fill in that professional period. I want to address class size, right? Because obviously, when you think about cutting an elementary section, that's the first thing that comes to mind is like, how is that going to impact our class size? I can tell you that was part of the board's calculus throughout. Like they wanted to understand when, what would they impact be if we cut a section, what would be on class size. Our class size remains obviously our priority on the kindergarten and first. Those are really our highest priorities when it comes to class size. And so our kindergarten classes are in the 21 to 22 range, as well as first grade. Our second and third grades are in the 22 to 24 range. And that's honestly like, this is the last year, right? Like I understand and the board understands, like we can't cut any more, well, we can, but if we cut any additional elementary sections, I think now we have moved into a class size that is disconnected from the expectations of this community. Mr. Reddy will tell you that was a focus of previous boards that really, and I think it was really driven by feedback from the community to say we need to keep our class sizes low, right? So, and that was part of our discussions, and I said, I'm comfortable this year, but one more section in any of these grade levels, and it really becomes something, we're talking about 28, 29, and that's obviously not a class size that I think we as a community and as an administration are really comfortable with. I'm sorry, pivoting back over to the right column. So we are reducing one of our two clinicians that we had. I will just share, and I think there's an important tangent because I know in my absence, when the cat's away, the mice will play, as it were. So it was brought up about effective school solutions. I think that was brought up last week. That this, I'm not exactly sure what the editorialization was, but it's financially irresponsible. We have our own people that can do this. Neither of which is actually true. In fact, it's very financially responsible. It's at worst a budget neutral program. And basically, to give you some color on this, Effective School Solutions is an outside provider, and they're not some fly-by-night operation. They've been in business for at least a decade. They're embedded in many school districts. They were in West Orange when I was in West Orange. They were in Old Bridge when I was in Old Bridge. And essentially what they do is they provide a intense sort of therapeutic environment within the school. Why is that important? Well, for two reasons. One, for students, whether they are regular education students or special education students, it provides a step-up environment into which those students can go to see if we can provide the student with the supports they need here, so that they can stay in their home school, right? I think it's more times than not, that's where students want to be, and more times than not, that's where the parents want their students to be, particularly if they feel they can be adequately and satisfactorily serviced. But it also serves as a step down, right? So it prevents, when possible and when it makes sense and is agreed upon by the child study team, and the parents are comfortable with it, an opportunity to not send a student out of district, thus incurring anywhere between $150,000 and $200,000 price tag for an out-of-district school. But it also gives us an option as Dr. Lamogli and her teams engage with parents whose kids are out of district, say, hey, listen, are you interested in maybe having your child come back to their home high school? Well, we have something that might be able to support them, and so we can potentially bring students back, thus reducing that out-of-district. So the prospect that this is financially irresponsible is, I don't know if it's misinformation or disinformation, but it's absolutely false. Now, in terms of, our staff can do it, and I say this with all proper respect for our school counselors, and I think they'd be the first ones to admit that their credential, their license, if you will, which is a Department of Education school counselor certificate, does not qualify them to do certain things. One thing in particular is to do, a psychiatric clearance, right? So sometimes students will say something will happen, and by policy we'll say, listen, before you can come back, you need to be cleared psychiatrically, if you can stay. Typically, if a parent has their own counselor or a therapist, they can go there. But if they don't, they're in a psych ward in a hospital. And I told the association, I said this publicly when the association president, Ms. DeSaro, brought this up the first time of multiple times, And I stated that publicly. And I said, that is a added benefit to this, is that we can save our students the trauma of having to go to a psychiatric ward to be evaluated. So, but I mention it in the context of the loss of the clinician because it's an example of another mental health resource and support that's built into our high school. These are factors that led me to ultimately say, certainly don't want to reduce that person. She's an outstanding employee, an outstanding clinician, but these are the kinds of factors that we consider when we're making these difficult decisions. Finally, I spoke about hourly employees and how we're able to reduce them, and paraprofessionals. So board members, and I want to give this an example of good questions your board is asking when I make recommendations. They are not, I can assure you that this board is not a rubber stamp. As much as they have confidence in me, they are not a rubber stamp. That they said, well, wait a second. What does that mean for our special education students? Your board asked that question. It's a good question. It's an important question. And I said that these are as a result of the good work that Dr. Lamoglia is doing with her child study teams, is because the goal when you have a student in special education, ideally, is that they transition to not needing it, right? Even within the program, it's the least restrictive environment. So if we're doing if whenever possible, we want to move them into the least restrictive environment, which ultimately is being declassified. That's the goal, if we can do it, right? So what that means is that students are showing progress through participation in our special education programs, and whereby previously they required a paraprofessional, the child study team has determined, and the parents are in agreement, that that's no longer necessary. So that's how that happens.
As a special education provider, I always say our job is to put ourselves out of business. Like if we're doing our jobs, like that's the hope, right? Is that in the end we put ourselves out of business.
That's right.
So it doesn't always work that way,
No.
but you know.
Yeah. So that's and you know, that's really, those are our reduced positions. That's, you know, the reasoning behind it or how we're able to do it. And I will just conclude with this, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Donnelly to talk about, you know, some of the changes to the budget that happened between the 25th and the budget we move forward tonight. Is that we're still who we are, right? I think we can. That's one thing we can feel good about. You know, when this budget passes, is we're moving into the 26-27 school year. The Homedale that we know, and the Homedale we love, and the Homedale that we expect, we are that district. And next year is a new year, and you know, we'll approach the challenges as they come, and hopefully we continue to, you know, maintain our identity moving forward. Ms. Donnelly?
I was going to say, Matt, can you go back one slide? Right there. No. One more. Go down. No, the other way. One more. Stop. Yeah, just, I don't know if you wanted to touch on this one, but
Yeah.
These are some of the things Dr. Cascone already hit on from before about the VOTEC. We're actually, thankfully, we're lucky this year that we have actually less going to VOTEC than we budgeted for. But the inefficiencies and all the, I don't know, other challenges, but obviously we've been talking about them for months, from energy, transportation, and obviously the number one, for those that haven't listened, that we've been saying it for months, last year benefits cost was $15 million. This year it's 19. It would have been 20 and a half, am I about right? You know, didn't we save about $1.5 million? Yeah. So basically, that's $5.5 million we had to go find in the seat cushions or wherever else it might have been. So that's by far the biggest white elephant in the room. And next year, the white elephant isn't going anywhere. It's going to be back here again. And I'm not sure what that looks like. And like Scott said, we're here now, so we'll just enjoy the now. But I don't know if there's any other budget.
Yeah, listen,
challenges you want to
I'm
hit.
not going to belabor the financial. I think the folks, and I recognize some faces, and I know the folks in this room are a well-informed group. You know, so we're preaching to the choir to some extent in terms of, you know, engaging and reading, and you know, so I'm not, you know, if you're interested, there, you know, it's all online. The discussions, the budget newsletters, and of course, if you're following the local media and the regional and the state media, it's happening everywhere. You know, so.
Yep. What's that? I got the clicker. Okay, I'm going to take this from the standpoint of the changes from the tentative budget and just highlight some of the items that are in the budget without going through the details that we did last month. And the tax impact, I'll review that again, but that remains unchanged, even though we had changes to the budget. So when we presented this at the tentative budget, we presented a $70 million property tax levy. That does not change. And our state aid at just over $5 million, that does not change. Those are our two largest revenue sources, and we discussed at the tentative budget that we don't really have many opportunities to raise revenue. Those are our two primary sources. But you'll see down at the bottom, the other revenue has increased by $920,000. By request of the county office, we were asked to bring our preschool program into our regular budget. It was previously in an enterprise fund, which is where things that operate more like a business, but they are recognized in our student headcount, and she asked that we bring it in here. So that is the revenue. It represents an estimate of 92 students for next year. And if you're asking, we currently have 95 students, but students come and go sometimes during the year, so that is more of a composite number.
Hey, Deb, is that coming from the state down to the county? Is all the counties almost reporting it the same way? Is it?
I don't know how
Okay,
other
I'll just-
schools, some schools have it in
not every
Fund
school
20,
has
which is
it,
a
right.
because they have the grant. We don't utilize the
Right.
grant, so
Did you,
it's
did
different.
you just mention that the preschool money is now allowed to be counted into our budget?
Is that in perpetuity, or is that a one-time for this year's budget?
No, we're moving that.
We're allowed to
into-
do that
we're-
from
yes.
moving forward.
So
Normal.
then changes, so if we increase the tuition rates for
Well,
preschool and stuff
remember,
like.
they also have medical benefits and all the other, right? So as
Right, so
those go
there's
up,
that
right,
cost
so
associated
cost
with
is
that
associated,
transition now where
Yep.
it was
Right
separate.
now, the current analysis, we are still around break even with that program. And the budget is a break even program.
That's exactly where
We're
I was
not
going. I
making-
think it could be
we're
good
not
or
really
bad.
Right,
making
because,
money.
I mean, we've talked about expanding that program, but we couldn't use the funds associated, the tuition funds
Right now,
associated
there
with
are
that.
82 kids actually enrolled for next year. So we
And what was
estimated
the
that-
number last year, or this year?
Currently, we have 95 kids.
Okay,
in
so
the
it's a
program.
drop of 13.
But that's enrolled right now. The process is
Right,
still
I
ongoing.
understand,
right?
but
There are
I'm just
tours
saying
set
current
up, right.
state, sure.
So that's why we chose 92, because we may have a student show up on November 1st that moves in,
Yes.
right? We're not getting the full tuition, right? Or you might have a student move out. So 92 is a good composite
Right, so it's good from the
number.
tuition's perspective, because it's increasing our,
Right.
but it has the cost associated with, because now then they're going to be
But remember,
part of the
I'm
HTA?
I'm still, no, they still are, their salaries are their salaries, right? But they still have medical benefits. So I'm saying if medical benefits continue to increase, that could
Understood.
impact the
Okay.
expenses here. right?
Understood.
But still, we're able to use it for our school if we had a profit.
Yes,
Which we couldn't do
right.
before. Okay.
Yep, I'm still analyzing. Remember, I segregated everything to analyze it this year, so I'm still analyzing, but right now, I'm going to still hold that it's
If
neutral.
possible, on a side note, if you could let us know how many teachers are actually on the medical plan from the preschool, that would be good to know. You don't have to answer that now, just later on, because I have an idea, potentially, depending on what that number might be, and we could discuss that.
Okay. Okay. And we'll just quickly go back over the tax levy increase. Last year, for the current year, 25-26 was just over 65 million. We're allowed to increase the 2%, which is the 1.3 million. And then we have our healthcare adjustment, which is based on a state allowable adjustment to the tax levy based on the increase to the state health benefits. So that's about 3.4 million, bringing us to a 7.19% increase in the tax levy for 26-27. We can look at more details on that. We also have our debt service component of our tax levy. That's down slightly, just under 1%, bringing us with a net of 6.9% increase. That's a total tax rate of 1.0391 for 26-27, and that equates to $762.10, or $63.51 a month, on an assessed value of $1,129,951. Okay. So these are the revised expenditures. In instruction, we increased the budget from what we had in our tentative budget by about $696,000. and that is the preschool expenditures plus the change of the dance teacher. In the student support services, the 106,000 increase relates to the preschool coordinator and her assistant that run the program for the school. Tuition out of district was reduced by 142,000. As Dr. Casco noted, we have less students than what we anticipated during the tentative budget because we've had a large reduction to what we normally, our trends normally were for enrollment. The last change was an increase in our employee benefits of about 259,000 related to the preschool expenditures and as well the reinstatement of the dance teachers in there as well. So that is the total increase of 920,000. It's, even balanced. I wanted to review fund balance and our reserve recap, because on the agenda for tonight is the sale of 34 Crawfords, which is, what do we call this, Lefferts? Addie's house or Lefko's house, to the township for just over $1 million. The district will be using that to add to our fund balance, $587,123. That will bring us to the statutory requirement. If you've been following, we've been talking that we have been below the statutory requirement, and the county was prepared to have us on I'll call it a corrective action plan, reviewing our budgets quarterly with myself and Dr. Cascone. But by doing this, we put money into, I'll call it, if on a personal level, be your emergency reserves, right? This is money that we're required to have so that there is money to fall back on in the event of emergency. And we were running significantly low. We were able to add about, I think it was like about 550,000 at the end of June of '25, and now this gets us at the statutory level. So I can't say how happy we are to have that funding. In addition, we are adding 243,000 roughly to our capital reserve, which we can withdraw for capital projects in the future, and 200,000 for our maintenance reserve, which is important. For example, this year, we did withdraw some money from our maintenance reserve because we had an issue with our burglar alarms, which was not budgeted. So these reserves are of significant importance in managing the infrastructure of the district. We can't foresee everything that happens with our buildings, and this gives us funding to fall back on at the discretion of the board during the school year.
Wait, was that the burglar alarm or the basketball court?
The burglar alarm.
Yeah,
Burglar alarm was money we withdrew from maintenance during the year.
I see.
We originally requested 62, but we were able to do it for about 22. So,
Deb, do you mind if I jump in here?
Sure.
Your next, could you just go to your next slide? I just want to make sure this isn't completely out of context. Oh, good. All right, go back then. Thanks. That's the end. Okay. So I think I want to spend a little, probably much to the chagrin of our amazing students who are here. You probably are like, this guy keeps droning on. But thank you, by the way, for being here. I forgot to say that. I was remiss in thanking our students for coming tonight. And again, I am sorry that I was not here to hear from you personally. I think I've interacted with most, if not all of you at some point in time, any of your events. And you're, of course, the reason why, I come here every day. So thank you. So I want to just spend some time in this slide because there is sort of an intersection with courtesy busing, right? Just copied on an email that went to the town committee. Fine, it's good. People are communicating, they're reaching out, they're asking questions. It's terrific. Really kind of asking the town committee, like, why aren't you earmarking this for courtesy busing? And Mayor Imprevidu's response, which was an appropriate response, was like, we're buying a house. It's not our place nor our purview to tell the school district how they're going to spend the funds, right? But still, folks are saying like, gee, like it would have been great if you could use some of the proceeds of this of the sale of the house to save courtesy busing. This really provides really all the explanation and rationale I think that one needs to know to understand why the board and I were not recommending doing that, is because this money was critical, as Mrs. Donnelly explained, in really improving our solvency as a district, bringing us up to that legal requirement of undesignated fund balance. Some folks may have remembered that our Moody's rating went down last year, largely because of the fund balance. Right? Then, of course, obviously, having the rainy day fund, whether it's maintenance or cap reserve, is super, super important because, like, if you have an expense and you don't have money for it, we can't borrow, we don't have a credit card, right? So we need that. And I think the other reason is that as a one-time influx of revenue, you know, we'd be, not only would be remain in, you know, less solvent as a district, but it also, we'd be back in the same boat next year. So, you know, outside of a annual, you know, infusion of that capital, that revenue, those were kind of the driving, you know, kind of reasons behind the board's and the administration's recommendation, the board's support for the use of the revenue for the purpose as outlined by Mrs. Donnelly. So.
And just following up on subscription busing, last week I talked about it, and I said May 11th for the eligibility chart, whether you were courtesy or not, and the survey maybe by May 15th, but I think we're ahead of schedule. So meeting with the transportation coordinator tomorrow, we should be able to finalize and post the eligibility list by the end of day Friday, and hope to have the survey out by midweek next week. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule on that.